The town of Maplewood was a quiet place, nestled deep in the heart of the countryside. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever happened. That is, until the day the car arrived. It was an old, rusty thing with a faded red paint job that looked like it had seen better days. The car seemed out of place as it rolled into town, its engine growling lowly as it coasted down the main street. No one knew where it had come from, and no one recognized the man behind the wheel. He was an older man, with deep-set eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He drove slowly, his eyes scanning the streets as if searching for something. The townsfolk watched him from their windows and doorways, feeling a strange sense of unease as the car passed by. The man drove the car to the edge of town, where he parked it in front of an old, abandoned house. He got out, looked around, and then walked inside, disappearing into the shadows of the decrepit building. The car sat there, silent and unmoving, but something about it felt wrong. A few days later, strange things began to happen. The first incident occurred on a quiet Thursday evening. A young couple, Tom and Lisa, were walking home from dinner when they passed by the old house. They noticed the car sitting in the driveway, its headlights flickering on and off. "That's strange," Tom said, slowing his pace. "I thought that house was abandoned." "Maybe someone moved in," Lisa suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. They stood there for a moment, watching the car's lights flicker. Suddenly, the car's engine roared to life, and the headlights shone brightly, blinding them. They heard the screech of tires as the car lunged forward, forcing them to jump out of the way. "Are you okay?" Tom asked, his heart pounding. "Yeah," Lisa replied, shaken, "but that car it tried to hit us." They looked back at the car, which had stopped just a few feet away. The headlights dimmed, and the engine fell silent. It sat there, as if nothing had happened. "Let's get out of here," Tom said, grabbing Lisa's hand. They hurried away, not daring to look back. Word of the incident spread quickly through Maplewood. People began to talk about the car, whispering about how it had tried to run Tom and Lisa down. Some said it was just a coincidence, a freak accident, but others weren't so sure. One night, an old man named Mr. Jenkins was sitting on his porch, enjoying a glass of whiskey, when he heard a strange sound. It was a low, rumbling growl, like the sound of a beast lying in wait. He looked up and saw the car parked across the street, its engine idling. The headlights were off, but he could feel its gaze on him, like it was watching him. "Who's there?" Mr. Jenkins called out, squinting into the darkness. The car's engine revved, and it began to move slowly towards him. Mr. Jenkins stood up, his heart racing. "Stay back," he shouted, backing towards his front door. But the car kept coming, its engine growling louder and louder. Mr. Jenkins turned and ran into his house, slamming the door behind him. He peered out the window, but the car was gone. All that was left was the faint smell of exhaust and the feeling that something evil had just passed by. As the days went by, more strange incidents occurred. People reported seeing the car driving around town at odd hours, its headlights flickering in the dark. Others swore they heard whispers coming from the car, like the voice of a man calling out to them. Then, one night, a local teenager named Billy went missing. He had been out with friends, but when it was time to go home, he was nowhere to be found. His parents searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him. The last place he was seen was near the old house, the one with the rusty red car parked out front. The police were called, and they conducted a search of the area. But the house was empty, and the car was gone. There was no trace of Billy, no clues as to where he might have gone. But the people of Maplewood knew. They knew that the car had taken him, just like it had tried to take Tom and Lisa, and just like it had stalked Mr. Jenkins. The car was alive, and it was hunting. The town's fear grew as the incidents continued. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one knew what to do. Some whispered that the car was cursed, that it had been possessed by an evil spirit. Others said it was the work of the man who had driven it into town, that he had somehow transferred his soul into the vehicle. Whatever the truth, the car had become a living nightmare for the people of Maplewood. They locked their doors at night, refusing to go out after dark. Children were kept indoors, and the streets were deserted as soon as the sun went down. But the car didn't care. It roamed the town at all hours, its headlights cutting through the night like the eyes of a predator. It was searching for something or someone. One evening, a stranger came to town. He was a tall, lean man with a weathered face and cold, piercing eyes. He carried a large duffel bag and walked with a determined stride, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The townspeople watched him warily as he made his way to the old house. He didn't knock or hesitate. He simply walked up to the front door and let himself in. Inside, the house was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of decay. The stranger didn't seem to notice. He walked straight to the living room, where a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dim glow over the room. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a book. It was an old, leather-bound tome with strange symbols etched into the cover. The stranger set his bag down and opened the book. As he read, his lips moved silently, chanting words in a language long forgotten. The air in the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe. The car outside let out a low growl, its engine idling as if in anticipation. The stranger continued to chant, his voice growing louder. The symbols in the book began to glow, and the room was filled with an eerie, pulsating light. Suddenly, the car roared to life, its headlights shining brightly through the windows. The stranger smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "The curse is almost complete," he whispered, closing the book. "Soon, the car will be unstoppable." The next morning, the stranger was gone, but the car remained. It sat in the driveway of the old house, its engine idling softly. The people of Maplewood watched it from their windows, their hearts filled with dread. They knew something terrible was coming, but they didn't know how to stop it. As the day went on, the car began to move. It drove slowly through the streets, its headlights flickering on and off. It seemed to be searching for something or someone. By nightfall, the car had made its way to the town square. It sat in the center of the square, its engine rumbling ominously. The townspeople gathered around, keeping their distance, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the car's engine roared to life. It lunged forward, speeding towards the crowd. People screamed and scattered, trying to escape its path, but the car was relentless. It chased them down, its tires screeching as it swerved and turned. It was as if the car had a mind of its own, driven by a dark, malevolent force. One by one, the people of Maplewood fell victim to the car's rampage. The town was thrown into chaos, and the once quiet streets were filled with the sounds of screams and screeching tires. The car had become a monster, and there was no escaping it. In the midst of the chaos, an old woman named Mrs. Turner stood on her porch, watching the carnage unfold. She was the oldest resident of Maplewood, and she knew more about the town's history than anyone else. She had heard the stories of the cursed car, of the evil spirit that had possessed it, and she knew that there was only one way to stop it. With a heavy heart, Mrs. Turner walked into her house and retrieved an old, dusty box from the attic. Inside was a small, ornate dagger, passed down through her family for generations. The dagger was said to have the power to banish evil spirits, but it required a great sacrifice. Mrs. Turner knew what she had to do. She left her house and made her way to the town square, where the car was still rampaging. As she approached, the car seemed to sense her presence. It stopped abruptly, its engine growling as it turned to face her. Mrs. Turner raised the dagger high, chanting the words that had been passed down through her family. The air around her crackled with energy, and the car's engine roared in anger. With a final, desperate cry, Mrs. Turner plunged the dagger into her heart. The car let out a deafening screech as a blinding light erupted from its headlights. The light engulfed the town, and for a moment, everything was silent. When the light faded, the car was gone, the town was still, and the people of Maplewood slowly emerged from their hiding places. They found Mrs. Turner's body lying in the town square, the dagger still clutched in her hand. She had sacrificed herself to save the town, and the curse had been broken. In the days that followed, the town of Maplewood slowly returned to normal. The car was never seen again, and the old house at the edge of town was finally torn down. But the memory of the car's rampage lingered, and the townspeople couldn't shake the feeling that the evil wasn't truly gone. Some said they could still hear the sound of the car's engine at night, echoing through the empty streets. Others claimed to have seen headlights flickering in the darkness, as if the car was still out there, waiting. Life in Maplewood went on, but the scars of that night remained. Years passed, and the events of that night became little more than a ghost story told around campfires and whispered in dark corners. The town of Maplewood had moved on, but the curse had not. One stormy night, A young couple driving through town spotted something in their rearview mirror. It was a pair of headlights glowing faintly in the rain-soaked darkness. They didn't think much of it at first, but the headlights began to get closer, their light growing brighter and brighter. The car behind them was gaining speed, its engine roaring like a beast in the night. Panicking, the couple tried to outrun it, but the car was relentless. It followed them through the winding streets of Maplewood, never letting up, never slowing down. Suddenly, the car rammed into the back of their vehicle, sending them skidding off the road. They crashed into a tree, the impact jarring them violently. Dazed and bleeding, the couple looked up just in time to see the car pull up alongside them. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a shadowy figure behind the wheel. But there was no driver. The car was empty. The headlights flared brightly, blinding them, and the engine let out a deafening roar. The car lunged forward, slamming into their vehicle one last time. The couple screamed as everything went black.